last but certainly not least, another speaker who we've had the opportunity to work with in years past, who is going to, pass this down, please, address some of the needed new incentives to repurpose major market drugs for rare disease. Emil Kakkis, president of the Every Life Foundation for Rare Disease. Thanks, Emil.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. We're running a little bit late, and I will go fairly quickly. We're going to talk about a new incentive that would help get patented drugs repurposed for rare diseases. So I think we can do more with the science we already have. There's a lot of drugs that have been developed that are not being tested in rare diseases because there's no incentive, and if a company that has a major market drug really doesn't want that drug to be tested in rare disease because of the risk. What if something happens to a patient, or it might hurt their brand, in fact, so they won't provide the drug and they won't do any of the work. And yet many of those drugs are very well tested. We know that they're safe. We know that large millions of patients may be getting them, but we won't get the opportunity to test them. And so we think that many of these drugs will affect very defined biological pathways, and there'll be known genetic diseases of those pathways which they might be able to use for. And yet I hear many foundations call me and say, we're trying to get access to the drug. Can you help us get this company to give it to us? But I know the problem. The problem is there's only risk. And so there's many of these opportunities are not being taken, and we're not leveraging the work we've already done in these rare disease, in these common market drugs. So I think the risk to a big product, like a billion-dollar product, is one of the problems. The adverse events that might occur, and there's no benefit. If they're treating 1 million patients, adding a few hundred more has absolutely no benefits. There's only downside risk for a big company. So the concept is, you know, if there is an original patent that the company has, that's really what's protecting their market and what they're focused on. But adding market exclusivity on the end of that is one of the ways to help increase their potential long term. There are many types of exclusivity that exist, and I don't want to go through all of these, but basically there are certain rules today relating to the Pediatric Act, the Best Products for Children Act, BPCA, which adds 6 months of exclusivity if a company does a clinical study in a pediatric patient based on a written request from FDA. If they do that study, then they can get additional 6 months of market exclusivity added on to their other exclusivity. What we'd like to do now is to develop a new repurposing exclusivity, and this one would be a little bit different, in which we believe that by adding, if a drug company has a major market drug and does the clinical work, phase 1, phase 2 clinical studies, a phase 3 study, to show the right dose, that it's safe, and how to use the drug efficiently in a rare disease, and they get that on the label, that they would then get an additional 6 months of exclusivity on the end of their major market patent. So this would protect the overall market. And that would be very valuable to a company with a major market drug. It would change the economics around repurposing from one that they are not interested in to now one that's now going to be important. In the pediatric area, there was many of the drugs now have pediatric studies completed. Now this program, we're proposing that they put it on the label because we want to get the rare disease community away from off-label use and more onto well-designed on-label use, that we know how it works and to do it. So that's why we're demanding a little higher standard here for this program. The great thing about this is you have hundreds of patented drugs that are highly specific, that are very, very interested, and sponsors who have the financial resources and the technical resources. And if you put an incentive like this out, those hundreds of drugs could potentially be looked at for repurposing opportunities, and I think many will. And you can imagine a situation where we may have had 400 new therapies for rare disease in the last few years, but you could probably get 200 to 400 more indications for the existing group of drugs developed over a period of the next 5 or 8 years. It could be that dramatic of an effect by repurposing. And the reason this is different from generic repurposing is that these drugs still have a sponsor. That sponsor has money. The government's not spending the investment. The companies are really spending the investment. And they have the personnel. They know how to do the clinical development. They understand the drug. They understand how to do it. They'll need to focus on what rare disease to work on, but we let them figure that out. And what it takes to get on the label, well, they'll work that out with FDA just like they do everything else. I think this is the way to turn the resources of the industry onto rare disease and leverage the investment we've already created. We think less off-label use would be important, but also think about the orphan model. People talk about orphan model being unsustainable because very expensive drugs for all these rare diseases just with too many. But what if several hundred of these were actually relatively lower priced drugs that were priced for the common market that now have been repurposed? You're actually going to generate a whole bunch of less expensive drugs by leveraging the existing science in our patented drugs. And then the orphan model is a mix. There's some inexpensive repurposed drugs, there's some expensive targeted drugs, but then it's a more sustainable model that we can actually get more patients treated and get the work done. So the Open Act is a bill we've put together. It is moving it forward and continuing to look for co-sponsors. And eventually, sorry, first it has to get dropped, but when that happens. Certainly connect with us if you're interested in learning more about the Open Act, but we are proceeding ahead. Maybe it'll be part of 21st Centuries, we won't know. But we think is a really important opportunity how to take what we have and turn it onto the problems we face. Thank you.